'Twas the night before Christmas. A visit from St. Nicholas. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mama in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from the bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave the luster of midday to objects below. When what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen. On Comet, on Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen. To the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle mount to the sky. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys and St. Nicholas too. And then, in a twinkling, I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." The night after Christmas. 'Twas the night after Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring, excepting a mouse. The stockings were flung in haste over the chair, for hopes of St. Nicholas were no longer there. The children were restlessly tossing in bed, for the pie and the candy were heavy as lead, while Mama in her kerchief and I in my gown had just made up our minds that we would not lie down. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my chair to see what was the matter. Away to the window I went with a dash, flung open the shutter and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave the luster of noonday to objects below. When what to my long anxious eyes should appear but a horse and a sleigh, both old-fashioned and queer, with a little old driver so solemn and slow, I knew at a glance it must be Dr. Brow. I drew in my head and was turning around when upstairs came the doctor with scarcely a sound. He wore a thick overcoat made long ago, and the beard on his chin was white with the snow. He spoke a few words and went straight to his work. He felt all the pulses, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, with a nod of his head to the chimney he goes. "A spoonful of oil, ma'am, if you have it handy. No nuts and no raisins, no pies and no candy. These tender young stomachs cannot well digest all the sweets that they get. Toys and books are the best. But I know my advice will not find many friends, for the custom of Christmas the other way tends. The fathers and mothers, and Santa Claus too, are exceedingly blind. Well, a good night to you." And I heard him exclaim as he drove out of sight, "These feastings and candies make doctors' bills right." The Gift of the Magi. $1.87. That was all, and 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealing implied. 3 times Della counted it. $1.87, and the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl. So Della did it, which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. While the mistress of the home is gradually subsiding from the first stage to the second, take a look at the home. A furnished flat at $8 per week. It did not exactly beggar description, but it certainly had that word on the lookout for the mendicancy squad. In the vestibule below was a letterbox into which no letter would go, and an electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring. Also, appertaining thereunto was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. The Dillingham had been flung to the breeze during a former period of prosperity when its possessor was being paid $30 per week. Now, when the income was shrunk to $20, though, they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and unassuming D. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat above, he was called Jim, and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. Della finished her cry and attended to her cheeks with the powder rag. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a gray cat walking a gray fence in a gray backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months, with this result. $20 a week doesn't go far. Expenses had been greater than she had calculated. They always are. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim. Her Jim. Many a happy hour she had spent planning for something nice for him. Something fine and rare and sterling. Something just a little bit near to being worthy of the honor of being owned by Jim. There was a pier glass between the windows of the room. Perhaps you have seen a pier glass in an $8 flat. A very thin and very agile person may, by observing his reflection in a rapid sequence of longitudinal strips, obtain a fairly accurate conception of his looks. Della, being slender, had mastered the art. Suddenly, she whirled from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brilliantly, but her face had lost its color within 20 seconds. Rapidly, she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now, there were 2 possessions of the James Dillingham Youngs in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. Had the Queen of Sheba lived in the flat across the airshaft, Della would have let her hair hang out the window some day to dry, just to depreciate Her Majesty's jewels and gifts. Had King Solomon been the janitor, with all of his treasures piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he passed, just to see him pluck at his beard from envy. So now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee and made itself almost a garment for her. And then she did it up again, nervously and quickly. Once she faltered for a minute and stood still, while a tear or two splashed on the worn red carpet. On went her old brown jacket. On went her old brown hat. With the world of skirts, and with the brilliant sparkle still in her eyes, she fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, the sign read, Madame Safranie, hair goods of all kinds. One flight up Della ran and collected herself, panting. Madame, large, too white, chilly, hardly looked the Safranie. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Madame. Take your hat off and let's have a sight at the looks of it. Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madame, lifting the mass with a practiced hand. Give it to me quick, said Della. Oh, and the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the hashed metaphor. She was ransacking the stores for Jim's present. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the stores, and she had turned all of them inside out. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design, properly proclaiming its value by substance alone and not by meretricious ornamentation, as all good things should do. It was even worthy of the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew that it must be Jim's. It was like him. Quietness and value, the description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with the 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim might be properly anxious about the time in any company. Grand as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it on the sly on account of the old leather strap that he used in place of a chain. When Della reached home, her intoxication gave way a little to prudence and reason. She got out her curling irons and lighted the gas, and went to work repairing the ravages made by generosity added to love. Which is always a tremendous task, dear friends. A mammoth task. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror long, carefully, and critically. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself, before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with $1.87? At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made, and the frying pan was on the back of the stove, hot and ready to cook the chops. Jim was never late. Della doubled the fob chain in her hand and sat on the corner of the table near the door that he always entered. Then she heard his step on the stairway down on the first flight, and she turned white for just a moment. She had a habit of saying a little silent prayer about the simplest everyday things, and now she whispered, Please, God, make him think I am still pretty. The door opened and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious. Poor fella, he was only 22. And to be burdened with a family, he needed a new overcoat and he was without gloves. Jim stopped inside the door as immovable as a setter at the scent of a quail. His eyes were fixed upon Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not read, and it terrified her. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply stared at her fixedly with that peculiar expression on his face. Della wriggled off the table and went for him. "Jim, darling," she cried, "don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold because I couldn't have lived through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say, Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I've got for you." "You've cut off your hair?" asked Jim laboriously, as if he had not arrived at that patent fact yet even after the hardest mental labor. "Cut it off and sold it," said Della. "Don't you like me just as well, anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I?" Jim looked about the room curiously. "You say your hair is gone," he said, with an air almost of idiocy. "You needn't look for it," said Della. "It's sold, I tell you. Sold and gone, too. It's Christmas Eve, boy. Be good to me, for it went for you. Maybe the hairs of my head were numbered," she went on with sudden serious sweetness, "but nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim?" Out of his trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake. He enfolded his Della. For 10 seconds, let us regard with discreet scrutiny some inconsequential object in the other direction. $8 a week or $1 million a year, what is the difference? A mathematician or a wit would give you the wrong answer. The Magi brought valuable gifts, but that was not among them. This dark assertion will be illuminated later on. Jim drew a package from his overcoat pocket and threw it upon the table. "Don't make any mistake, Dell," he said, "about me. I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or a shampoo that could make me like my girl any less. But if you'll unwrap that package, you may see why you had me going a while at first." White fingers and nimble tore at the string and paper. And then an ecstatic scream of joy, and then, alas, a quick feminine change to hysterical tears and wails, necessitating the immediate employment of all the comforting powers of the Lord of the Flats. For there lay the combs, the set of combs, side and back, that Della had worshipped long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure tortoise shell with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in the beautiful vanished hair. They were expensive combs, she knew, and her heart had simply craved and yearned over them without the least hope of possession. And now they were hers, but the tresses that should have adorned the coveted adornments were gone. But she hugged them to her bosom, and at length she was able to look up with dim eyes and a smile and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then Della leaped up like a little singed cat and cried, "Oh, oh." Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly upon her open palm. The dull, precious metal seemed to flash with a reflection of her bright and ardent spirit. "Isn't it dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down on the couch and put his hands under the back of his head and smiled. "Dell," said he, "let's put our Christmas presents away and keep them a while. They're too nice to use just at present. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs, and now suppose you put the chops on." The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men, who brought gifts to the baby in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents. Being wise, their gifts were no doubt wise ones, possibly bearing the privilege of exchange in case of duplication. And here I have lamely related to you the uneventful chronicle of two foolish children in a flat who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house. But in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all who give gifts, these two were the wisest. Of all who give and receive gifts, such as they are wisest. Everywhere they are wisest. They are the Magi. Santa Claus does not forget. Birdie was a very good boy. He was kind, obedient, truthful, and unselfish. He had, however, one great fault. He always forgot. No matter how important the errand, his answer always was, "I forgot." When he was sent with a note to the dressmaker, his mother would find the note in his pocket at night. If he was sent to the store in a great hurry to get something for tea, he would return late, without the article, but with his usual answer. His father and mother talked the matter over and decided that something must be done to make the little boy remember. Christmas was near, and Birdie was busy making out a list of things which Santa Claus was to bring him. "Santa Claus may forget some of those things," said his mother. "He cannot," replied Birdie, "for I shall write sled and skates and drum and violin and all the things on this paper. Then, when Santa Claus goes to my stocking, he will find the list. He can see it and put the things in as fast as he reads." Christmas morning came, and Birdie was up at dawn to see what was in his stocking. His mother kept away from him as long as she could, for she knew what Santa Claus had done. Finally, she heard him coming with slow steps to her room. Slowly, he opened the door and came towards her. He held in his hand a list very much longer than the one he had made out. He put it in his mother's hand, while tears of disappointment fell from his eyes. "See what Santa Claus left for me, but I think he might have given me one thing besides." His mother opened the roll. It was a list of all the errands Birdie had been asked to do for 6 months. At the end of all was written, in staring capitals, "I forgot." Birdie wept for an hour. Then his mother told him they were all going to Grandpa's. For the first time, he would see a Christmas tree. Perhaps something might be growing there for him. It was very strange to Birdie, but on Grandpa's tree, he found everything he had written on his list. Was he cured of his bad habit? Not all at once. But when his mother saw that he was particularly heedless, she would say, "Remember, Santa Claus does not forget." Mama's Happy Christmas. It had seemed to the little Wendell children that they would have a very sad Christmas. Mama had been very ill, and Papa had been so anxious about Mama that he could not think of anything else. When Christmas Day came, however, Mama was so much better that she could lie on the lounge. The children all brought their stockings into her room to open them. "You children all seem as happy as if you had had your usual Christmas tree," said Mama, as they sat around her. "Why, I never had such a happy Christmas before," said sweet little Agnes, "and it's just because you are well again." "Now I think you must all run out for the rest of the day," said the nurse, because your mama wants to see you all again this evening." "I wish we could get up something expressly for Mama's amusement," said Agnes, when they had gone into the nursery. "How would you like to have some tableaux in here?" asked their French governess, Miss Marcel. "Oh yes," they all cried. "It would be fun. Mama loves tableaux." So all day long they were busy arranging 5 tableaux for the evening. The tableaux were to be in the room which had folding doors opening into Mrs. Wendell's sitting room. At the proper time, Miss Marcel stepped outside the folding doors and made a pretty little speech. She said that some young ladies and a young gentleman had asked permission to show some tableaux to Mrs. Wendell if she would like to see them. Mrs. Wendell replied that she would be charmed. Then Mademoiselle announced the tableaux, opening the doors wide for each one. This is a list of the tableaux. First, the Sleeping Beauty. Second, Little Red Riding Hood. Third, the Fairy Queen. Fourth, Old Mother Hubbard. Fifth, the Lord High Admiral. Miss Marcel had arranged everything so nicely, and Celeste, the French maid, helped so much with the dressing that the pictures all went off without a single mistake. Mama was delighted. She said she must kiss those dear young ladies and that delightful young man who had given her such a charming surprise. So all the children came in rosy and smiling. "Why, didn't you know us?" asked the little Lord Admiral. "I know this," said Mama. "I am like Agnes. I never had such a happy Christmas before." How the Fir Tree Became the Christmas Tree. This is the story of how the fir tree became the Christmas tree. At the time when the Christ child was born, all the people, the animals, and the trees and plants were very happy. The child was born to bring peace and happiness to the whole world. People came daily to see the little one, and they always brought gifts with them. There were 3 trees standing near the crypt which saw the people, and they wished that they too might give presents to the Christ child. The palm said, "I will choose my most beautiful leaf and place it as a fan over the child." "And I," said the olive, "will sprinkle sweet-smelling oil upon his head." "What can I give to the child?" asked the fir, who stood near. "You," cried the others. "You have nothing to offer him. Your needles would prick him, and your tears are sticky." So the poor little fir tree was very unhappy, and it said, "Yes, you are right. I have nothing to offer the Christ child." Now, quite near the trees stood the Christmas angel, who had heard all that the trees had said. The angel was sorry for the fir tree, who was so lowly and without envy of the other trees. So, when it was dark and the stars came out, he begged a few of the little stars to come down and rest upon the branches of the fir tree. They did as the Christmas angel asked, and the fir tree shone suddenly with a beautiful light. And at that very moment, the Christ child opened his eyes, for he had been asleep, and as the lovely light fell upon him, he smiled. Every year, people keep the dear Christmas child's birthday by giving gifts to each other, and every year, in remembrance of his first birthday, the Christmas angel places in every house a fir tree also. Covered with starry candles, it shines for the children as the stars shone for the Christ child. The fir tree was rewarded for its meekness, for to no other tree is it given to shine upon so many happy faces.